Hi everybody, off and running. Dave White presents 90 minutes of variety entertainment on the radio. A little phone fun to kick off this latest edition. And let me tell you what we're going to have on this edition of DWP. West Britain interviews musician Pat Upton. Pat with the Spiral Staircase from many years ago, and Pat also worked with the late Ricky Nelson, and as a matter of fact has an interesting story that he relates to Wes about the evening that Ricky Nelson died in a plane crash, and how Pat was almost a passenger on that plane. I do an interview with author Bruce Scivally. Bruce, a former guest on Dave White Presents from about 2+ years ago, returns to talk about his new book, $1 Billion Batman. And even though we've done some programs and talked about Batman in the past, you know, it's sort of like the Titanic and the Three Stooges in that you just can't get, too much of Batman. And Wes then goes back to music, and he talks to author or biographer R.J. Smith about the late singer James Brown. So a good mix of entertainment, or variety, as we like to say.
Well, frequently, when West Britain and I do interviews with interesting guests, it's we'll say, that was great, we got to get you back on the show sometime. But that never seems to occur until now. And now we are going to have really an excellent and interesting guest back for an encore appearance on Dave White Presents. He was originally on November the 11th of 2009. Wow. We were much younger back then, Bruce. And he discussed Wes did an interview on his book on Superman. And he is author Bruce Scivally. So, Bruce, welcome back to Dave White Presents.
Well, thank you, Dave. It's a pleasure to be back.
All right. Now, I want to remind you, you had it, easy going the last time you were on. You were with that lightweight West Britain. But now, you've moved up. You're at the top of the ladder here, the man himself. All right.
Now I got the big guy, huh?
You got the big guy. Listen, the smart aleck remarks are just to have a little fun with Wes, so don't worry about that. What we are going to talk about this time, instead of Superman, we're going to talk about Batman. And Bruce has a new book out called $1 Billion Batman, a history of the Caped Crusader on film, radio, and television. Now, look, I want to tell the audience, Bruce, $1 billion, that's not the price of the book, is it?
No, thankfully it's not. It takes its title from the fact that the last Batman movie made $1 billion worldwide, and that Batman's now considered by Warner's to be their biggest corporate asset, which, considering they have Harry Potter, is saying a lot.
Wow, okay, all right, because I thought maybe, you were getting clever and you said, look, I'm going to price the book at $1 billion, and all I got to do is sell one. So it's not
I hadn't
quite
thought of that, but it's a great idea. Let's do that with my next book.
If you want to, for audience members, if you want to buy that, as usual, we've got a link up on the Persons of Interest page at my website. And now that I've, had some fun here at Wes's expense and picked on Bruce, tell people, $1 Billion Batman. Describe the book.
Well, the book is basically the story of Batman in movies and television from the time of his creation by Bob Kane in 1939 up through the serials, the TV show, and all the movies. So it's all the behind-the-scenes secrets of the Caped Crusader. All right, and it's not a criticism, and it's not a critical book, and by that I mean it's not Bruce Scivally getting on and saying why this movie was good and why this was bad and why this one was better. This is, you put it more in context of a history, am I correct? That's correct, yeah. I mean, I figure most people who are going to read the book, they've seen the movie since they're all out on DVD now. And I think, I always get kind of annoyed with film books where I'm reading 2 or 3 pages of a synopsis of a movie that I can just rent and watch, So I kind of avoided that, and instead I'm trying to tell all the sort of behind-the-scenes information, how the movies got made, why they were made, why they were made the way they were, the casting, who was considered, who wasn't,
all that sort of stuff. So from the first time they come up with the idea of making a movie until it gets released and all the details of how well it performed. So it's more of a history than it is a critical look at the films.
Okay, and I know that also you devote very little time to the comic books and the originator of that, and this focuses more on, like you say, film, radio, and television. Let's take them in sequence that way and start, because I don't think too many people are acquainted with Batman on the Radio, are they?
No, I don't believe so. And actually, the first chapter of the book does deal with Bob Kane, the creator, and how he kind of took a lot of credit for work he didn't necessarily do throughout his life. But then it goes from there into the Batman serials and the radio show. And I think a lot of people aren't very aware of the radio Batman, because although they tried a couple of times to do pilots and get Batman on the radio, he never had his own radio show. Yet he was on radio pretty frequently as a guest star on the Superman radio show, the old Bud Collyer show. And through the years, there were several different people who played Batman on the radio. Just about all the books I'd ever seen, including Les Daniels' Complete Batman, always said that Matt Crowley was the actor who had played Batman on the radio. Some will also mention Stacey Harris, and both Matt Crowley and Stacey Harris did play Batman in the early days. But in the research I did, I found out that the guy who actually played Batman on radio most often was an actor named Gary Merrill, an actor in New York. And he went on to co-star with Bette Davis in All About Eve and ended up marrying her, so we can say that Bette Davis is married to Batman.
All right, this is, and folks, I think I like that story, and it's a good example of things you're going to find in Bruce's book. This is a very well researched and thoroughly researched and thoroughly documented book. You mentioned the fellow playing Batman on the radio. I'd always gotten a kick out of Bud Collyer being Superman, because I could always picture Superman flying with a bow tie. People, see, you're one of the few that know who Bud Collyer is. Okay, look, the character of Batman was created in 1939. So we're talking about over 70 years that this character has evolved, and I said evolved, not devolved, has evolved. What's your opinion on why the character of Batman and the supporting characters and so on are so enduring?
Well, one of the things I say in my introduction is that one of the reasons I wrote the book actually is because when I did the Superman book, went out touring with that and going to conventions and so on, I had all sorts of people coming up to me saying, "When are you going to write one on Batman?" So I did, and found out that actually Batman is a more popular character in general than Superman is with people, which, I'm just a little curious about why that is. But my take on it is that Superman kind of represents goodness and hope and all the things that we aspire to be. All the Superman stories generally take place in daylight, and the Superman movies as well, whereas Batman is more about more darker impulses, because he's a character who's basically going out fighting crime as a way of exercising this need for revenge, the killer who killed his parents when he was a child. So it's a much darker kind of character, and the Batman stories generally take place at night. So the way I sum it up in my introduction is to say that Superman is who we aspire to be, but Batman is who we really are. And I think that's why his character has been so popular for so long.
The Superman character basically has been static. I'll use that term for its entire lifespan. They did come out with kind of a separate book story of Superboy, which the story of Superman when he was a boy, this kind of a deal. But otherwise, you can go through the whole genre, and Superman is still the same. Perry White's still old. Lois Lane is still cute, etc., etc. With the Batman, storyline, whatever the plot as it is, this has evolved. Batman gets older, Robin grows up, etc. Talk about that a bit, and tell us if you think that contributes to the enduring nature of the Batman character.
Well, I think it does. I mean, he is one of the characters who, from one comic to the next, ages a little bit. You know, I mean, when you look at the Batman comics from the first year he was created, he's kind of a dark vigilante character. Then after the first year, they introduced Robin, and from that point on, he's more of a kind of light-hearted, wisecracking crime fighter, and remained that way pretty much up until about 1970, when Denny O'Neil, and who was an editor at DC, and the artist Neil Adams kind of revamped Batman and kind of recast him in sort of a James Bond mold. They got rid of Robin, they gave him a sports car instead of the Batmobile, they had him moving in an apartment instead of Wayne Mansion. So, you know, he became more of a kind of James Bond kind of character. And then the next big sort of seismic shift in Batman was in the mid-'80s, when Frank Miller did The Dark Knight Returns, which had the older Batman, who had been retired for a while, coming out of retirement to battle crime and kind of clean up the city. So, you know, he is one of the few characters that the artists feel a little more, or are given a little more freedom to explore all the various aspects of his life, from, you know, current times to the future to the past, on and on.
Okay, now you mentioned you had James Bond in your description in there. You're not exactly a novice when it comes to James Bond either. You've written at least a book on James Bond, if I'm correct. And isn't there a connection, kind of a direct connection between James Bond and Batman?
Yes, there is. I co-authored a book with John Court called James Bond: The Legacy. That's one that we wrote in 2002 on the 40th anniversary of Bond. Now we're up to the 50th, hard to believe. But at the 40th anniversary, John and I had just finished producing all the special features on the James Bond DVDs, and we were asked to write that book. So we have ever since been considered sort of James Bond experts. So I always feel like, you know, when I'm mentioning that there's these James Bond links, that people are going to go, oh, but you're a James Bond expert. You're really looking for that and kind of stretching to find those linkages. But I'm really not. They're there, you know. When they were doing the first Batman movie, the Tim Burton movie, Michael Uslan, the producer, was very consciously kind of modeling how they were going to do those films on the James Bond formula of having the movies come out every 2 or 3 years. And actually, the first screenwriter he approached to write a script for it was Richard Maibaum, who'd written all the classic Bond movies in the 60s. When he couldn't get Maibaum, the next guy he did actually hire was Tom Mankiewicz, who wrote 3 Bond films in the 70s. So, you know, they certainly had that James Bond influence in there. And then again, when Christopher Nolan came on to direct the Batman movies, Christopher Nolan's a huge James Bond fan and kind of recast his films in a Bond mold, and went back and rewatched On Her Majesty's Secret Service before he started making Batman Begins to kind of get an idea of how to introduce that kind of iconic character. And you know, sort of played up characters like Lucius Fox, who's sort of the gadget master of the Batman movies, fulfills the same function as Q in the Bond films. And he was the first director to take Batman out of Gotham and make him a more international character, you know, taking him to Hong Kong in The Dark Knight, so that Batman, like James Bond, becomes this sort of international character going to exotic places.
All right. Now, I think for myself anyway, I was a big fan, there were so many people, of the television series. That would be the William Dozier series, starred Adam West and who was it, Burt Ward, among others. I won't ask your opinion of the show, good or bad. Everybody has their opinion of the show. But how important to the survival of the Batman character was the TV show? And do you think there would have been this series of TV movies were it not for, the series of Batman movies were it not for the TV show?
I think that's absolutely true. Personally, I think the show is absolutely brilliant. And one of the guys I interviewed for the book was Lorenzo Simple Jr., who kind of co-created the series with Dozier. And I also talked to Dozier's daughter, Deborah. But, that series, when it came along, the Batman titles, the comic books had gotten pretty silly by that point, because of the comics code and what they weren't allowed to do. So in the comics, it was Batman going back to prehistoric times, or there was one where Batman turns into Bat Baby, just really silly stories. So, everyone wants to talk about how, the real hardcore Batman fans want to denigrate the TV show and say that it was kind of a travesty of the character. but it was really a pretty accurate reflection of what those comic books were like in the 1960s. Matter of fact, some of the plots of the TV episodes are taken from some of the comic book stories. So, it was really kind of right on. But before the TV show came along, the sales on Batman were getting so low that DC was about to cancel the comic. So they were just going to kill it. But once the TV show hit the air, it's this overnight sensation, phenomenon. Everybody's watching it. It shoots to the top of the ratings. Suddenly the sales go through the roof, and Batman stayed with us. So if it hadn't been for that TV show, we may not have a Batman.
That's a very good point. And, the TV show actually had repercussions on, if that's the word, on the comic book series, in that I believe in the comic books they had killed off the butler, who was it, Albert the Butler. And after the TV show came on, everybody liked Albert the Butler. I hope I have the name right. And they had to incorporate him.
Actually.
Alfred, okay. They had to incorporate him back into the storyline again, because from the television show it was so popular. And I want to get in, I'm going to interject just an opinion on the characters of the story, and my all-time favorite, and this really applies to the television show, and that was the character of the police chief, O'Hara, who had to be the dumbest human being on the face of the planet.
O'Hara wasn't the brightest light in the refrigerator there. I mean, William Dozier himself said that O'Hara was just your classic sort of Irish cop who was so dumb that he'd gotten promoted to be police chief. And that's how Stafford Rapp played him. I mean, Stafford Rapp was not Irish, but he really poured on the thick Irish brogue to play that character.
Oh, it was, and his whole job description was to sit in the commissioner's desk and wring his hands and say, "We're helpless, we can't do anything. Can you get this guy running around the mask and a cape to go out and do what my so-called police force can't do?" Listen, I don't want to get bogged down on picking on poor old O'Hara, but he was a favorite of mine. Originally we had a Batgirl. In fact, wasn't there a Batwoman character at one time?
There was a Batwoman character in the comic books in the 1950s, and in the early 1960s, they did this sort of revamp of the character that they called the New Look, and that's when they first put the little yellow symbol on his chest with the bat inside instead of just having a bat on his chest. And Robin aged a little bit in the New Look, but they kind of went from that sort of classic Bob Kane-ish artwork to a more contemporary style of art, Murphy Anderson style art. So, once they introduced that in the 1960s, they kind of did away with Batwoman, and there was a Batgirl at that time too, who was Batwoman's daughter, I believe, if I remember right. So they got rid of some of those old characters, and the Bat Dog, Batmite, all that.
Yeah, they had Batmite. I never did understand that one.
No, me either. But like I say, the comics were pretty silly there in the 50s, a little more sci-fi inspired, But they brought back Batgirl because William Dozier felt like young girls needed a character they could latch onto in the show. So he went to the comic creators and said, can we have a girl character? So that's how they came up with Batgirl being Commissioner Gordon's daughter. So if it hadn't been for the TV show, you wouldn't have that version of Batgirl.
Let's move on so that we don't run out of time, because I could go on, especially talking about the TV show. It's hard to believe that TV show was only on for 2 or 3 years. It wasn't that long running a series, considering the impact that it had.
It came on during the midpoint of the 1966 series because ABC's schedule was really bombing, so they introduced what they called the second season and introduced some new shows halfway through the year, and Batman was the one that really took off. And one of the things I found interesting was it was such a phenomenon that shortly after that, when the U.S. Army was, we were at the height of the Vietnam War at that point, and the Army wanted to try out night vision on helicopters. So what they called that program in Vietnam was Project Batman. Had little Batman symbols on the helicopters because of the TV show being so popular.
Yeah, but it was, again, very comparatively speaking, short-lived and yet just a lasting impact. Now let's talk about, since your book is
television, radio, and film, there have been a number of movies made on Batman by, I guess, different directors, different actors playing the various roles. Tell the audience a bit, discuss the changes, if you will, between the movies. How did it evolve, or what changes were there between them?
Well, the story of the movies really begins with Michael Uslan, who just came out with his own book, a very good book called The Boy Who Loved Batman. And he's a guy who really, he was a Batman fan from the time he was a little kid, and he hated the TV show because he felt it was lampooning his hero. So he really wanted, as he put it, to wipe the words, zap, pow, and wham out of everyone's collective imagination. So he set about, trying to make a real serious Batman film. And he ended up getting a job at DC Comics, worked there for a while. They told him he needed to have more of a legal background, so he got a law degree. He goes, gets a job at United Artists. Finally starts pulling all his contacts together until he gets to rights to the Batman character, which, DC was kind of giving away because they felt after the TV show no one was going to want to make a movie about this. And he thought once he got the rights, it'd be a slam dunk. Go to a studio, make a deal, boom, got a movie. What he didn't realize was that it was going to be this 10-year journey of trying to convince the studios that there was some value in doing a more serious Batman. But he persevered and got that first movie made, and he's the guy who's kind of been, at the helm of all the movies ever since. He and Benjamin Melnick are the executive producers on those. They were partnered to acquire those rights. But in the first one, they had Tim Burton directing, who did the first two movies. And the Burton films, Burton, in any movie he does, he kind of creates his own strange, weird universe. And Batman was the first really big-budget movie that he made. So it was coming right after Pee-wee's Big Adventure. And after Batman, he did Edward Scissorhands, then he did the next Batman film. But Batman's the movie that really made him a top director in Hollywood. And certainly has a lot of his vision in it. However, his vision, particularly in Batman Returns, was a little too dark for the studios because you had kids going to McDonald's to get the Happy Meals, and they see there was the Batman tie-in, Batman toys, so it's like, oh, Mommy, Daddy, take us to see the Batman movie. And they go, and you've got the penguins sort of spitting black bile and all this kind of stuff that just scared the bejesus out of the kids. So there were lots of protests from McDonald's and from parents' groups and so on. So Warner's decided that maybe Tim Burton's vision was a little too dark for Batman, so they wanted to go a different way, and they kind of edged Burton out of the picture and hired Joel Schumacher, who was already doing those John Grisham adaptations for them, to take on the series with the dictum that he had to make the movies more kid-friendly. So everyone, always comes down hard on Schumacher for how kind of silly his movies are, but he sort of had his hands tied going in by the studio that he had to make them kid-friendly to win back these sponsors, which he did. And those movies, he did one with Val Kilmer, Batman Forever, hugely popular film. And a couple of years later, he does a sequel to that, Batman and Robin, with George Clooney, which everyone considers to be the absolute worst of all of them.
It's nice to have unanimity, isn't it?
It is, yep.
Okay.
So after that, the studio kind of put the series on ice for a while. Now, Schumacher said that after Batman and Robin, he really wanted to go a different direction. He really enjoys doing movies that are much grittier, lower budget, a little more guerrilla filmmaking style, and he wanted to do a Batman movie in that style, he said, with Kurt Russell playing Batman, which I think would have been fascinating if he'd done it, But the studio wouldn't back that, so they kind of put the character on ice for a while they tried to figure out what to do with it, and they were, over the years they thought of doing a Batman versus Superman movie, a Justice League movie, a live-action Batman Year One based on the animated show, based on the comic book, and Batman Beyond based on the animated show. So, none of those ever came to fruition, but then Christopher Nolan came to the studio with his take on Batman, and the studio got behind that. So we had Batman Begins, which got a lot of critical acclaim, and then The Dark Knight, which for a short while was the highest-grossing movie in history.
Do you think there's going to be more to come, either movies or television?
Well, we have a new Batman movie coming in July. It's going to be the third in Christopher Nolan's Batman trilogy, and he says that it will be the last. Although I'm sure, even though it may be his last Batman film, I know it's not going to be the last Batman movie because the character is just too profitable for Warner Brothers for them to let it die. So there'll definitely be another Batman. It'll just be interesting to see what direction they decide to go in.
Well, I certainly agree with that. When you've got, a movie like you say, when they're grossing $1 billion on the thing, you aren't just going to take that out and bury it. Okay, Bruce Scivally. Listen, we're out of time, but a fascinating subject, and I'll tell you, you're equally as expert on the subject of Batman as you were on Superman. And people think that maybe it's easy. You sit down, you read a little bit on Wikipedia on the computer, and then you're an expert. Boy, that's not the case. Folks, get any of Bruce's excellent books. This one that we were just discussing is called $1 Billion Batman, and I've told you how you can buy it. But you get any of his books, and you are going to be impressed with an excellent author doing a thorough job of research and putting together a fine book. So, Bruce, I want to thank you very much for the hard work and coming up with really interesting books. I want to wish you a lot of success on whatever project you have in the future, and I especially want to thank you for the return of Bruce Scivally, the Dave White Presents.